Hello, my name is Matt Sawada, one of the pastors here at LEFC, and I've been on staff now since September of 2012. One of the things that drew me to LEFC was actually its focus on disciple making. We see LEFC's mission. Actually, I think you talked about it last week. Anyone remember it? You remember what the mission is? Yeah, you're probably right. Our mission at LEFC is to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And see, and that is it's a beautiful mission. It's brief, right? It's succinct. It's biblical. I think it's great. The problem is, and what we experienced on staff was we began to run into this problem of if our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ, we had to ask the question, what actually is a disciple? And we each could answer that question, and we would use different texts, different languages, different language, it was all in English. We'd use different examples and illustrations. And so it was in 2016, our staff got together and we began to work on defining what a disciple is, having a unified language for disciple. We spent time studying the Gospels, looking at Jesus, the life of Jesus, and his attitudes, his beliefs, and his values. And as we began to work through that, synthesizing these frankly long lists, we actually came up with 8 words. They're in 4 phrases, and we call them the marks of a disciple. You see, we defined a disciple of Jesus, as someone who loves God, who loves people, who lives truth and proclaims Jesus. You see, a disciple is someone who is growing in their love for God. We see in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus gives us 2 commandments, these greatest commandments. And he tells us that we should love the Lord your God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So there's so much scripture that speaks to loving God, giving us, in some ways, very specific commands, but also some like nebulous ones. What does it mean to love God? Well, we began to realize that loving God is this umbrella mark. And if someone's not loving God, they're going to have a difficult time with the next 3. But the practical outflow of that first mark is loving people, living truth, and proclaiming Jesus. So a disciple is someone who not only loves God, a disciple is someone who actually obeys the second commandment and loves people. Right? It's there's so much scripture that speaks to loving others. In the New Testament, there are dozens of one another statements, right? To serve one another, to care for one another, to love one another. We see that in 1 John 4, John, the Apostle John, says that we can love because we've first been loved. And so the love of God actually then flows horizontally into our relationships with those around us. And we can do this, Philippians 2, through the mindset of Christ, and actually putting the interests of those around us before ourselves. So loving people is a very tangible way for us to show how we love God. And that might come in the form of a meal, or time, or listening, or praying for, or serving. A disciple is someone who not only loves God, but loves people. A disciple is someone who thirdly, our third mark, is someone who's living truth. It's not enough just to know what's in this Bible, right? That's the first step. It's tough to live something that you don't know. But I think that this third mark is essential, because it begins to put skin on what's written in this text. We know in John 14, Jesus says that I know that someone loves me by the way they obey my commands. You see, time and time again, where we are encouraged, we're exhorted to obey to live. And living truth is when we begin to put our desires aside and begin to live out his. Galatians 5 speaks to this shift in nature, right? Shifting from our sinful human nature to our spiritual one through the Spirit. And it's when we begin to put away the desires of our flesh. Galatians 5, 20 and 21 have a long list of those fleshly desires and leading into these fruits of the Spirit. This third mark really begins to speak to how we live, what we say, how we say it, and why we say it. It really begins to put kind of some meat on the bones of what it means to love God. And so a disciple is someone who is growing in their love for God while they love people, live truth, and lastly, a disciple is growing in the way they proclaim Jesus. You see, Jesus, one of his last words, his last commands for us in Matthew 28, tells us to go and make disciples of all nations. We are literally commanded to go and proclaim Jesus to those around us. No, that doesn't mean everyone's in foreign missions. That doesn't mean everyone has to be a paid pastor. But what that does mean is everyone is commanded to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. And how we do that is going to vary differently. It's going to change depending on what we do, on where we live, on who we know. It's going to change on if this is on the sideline of a soccer field or in a classroom. It's going to change depending on which office you're in or how much time you have while you walk your dog. Right? But proclaiming Jesus is a command that we've each been given. And so these four marks are something that none of us will ever arrive in. We're never going to perfectly embody loving God, loving people, living truth, or proclaiming Jesus. But these they're marks for us to pursue and things for us to think about and then grow in. I think that we would be wise as LEFCers, but just as believers, to use the resources he's given us to grow in these four marks. You see, he's given us, 2 Peter 1, these very great and precious promises. Let's spend time in your word. Get to know his character and allow an understanding of who he is begin to change the way you live out today and tomorrow. In that same text, 2 Peter 1, he tells us about another resource. He encourages us that we have now, through these very great and precious promises, we are able to be a partaker of the divine nature. You see, friends, he's given us his Spirit. And it's through the gift of his Spirit that we can walk in a manner worthy of the gospel to which we've been called. And lastly, a last beautiful resource that he's given us is each other. He's given us community. He's given us the people sitting on your right and your left. Lean into those relationships. But we need brothers and sisters to be real with, to be, there are going to be days where I'm high and someone else is low, and then vice versa the next week. And so we need to journey through this life, pursuing these marks, pursuing this God with other people. And so use these resources, his word, his Spirit, and his body to grow in these four marks. You know, we've taken the time to write a short discipleship study called the Deeper Marks book. And this short study is a glimpse at these four marks, just kind of zooming in and seeing what would it mean for me to love God in certain ways, to love people a little differently, to live truth and proclaim Jesus. I'd encourage you, call the office. We'd love to get you one of these. And this is something that you can do with someone else. You see, our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And friends, that is a generational calling, because a disciple will actually make another disciple. And so this is a tool to help us not just grow in our relationship with Christ, but to journey along with someone else. Praying for you as you embark a journey of growing in these marks. We're excited to be a church who is making disciples of Jesus.